Darth Plagueis, the Moon Sith Lord, is one of the most enigmatic figures in Star Wars lore, with his life and death steeped in mystery, manipulation, and secrecy. His story is not just one of power and ambition, but also of profound knowledge that could alter the course of the galaxy itself. Plagueis' pursuit of immortality, his obsessive study of the Force's deeper mysteries, and his attempts to manipulate life and death set him on a path that ultimately led to his demise, murdered by his own apprentice, Darth Sidious, who would go on to become Emperor Palpatine. However, the mystery surrounding Plagueis is not confined solely to his death, but also to the final secret he had uncovered, a secret that Sidious feared would give him unimaginable power and one that could have reshaped the galaxy forever. This secret, which Plagueis never had the chance to reveal, is the key to understanding the ultimate depth of his knowledge and ambition. Plagueis was already a master of Sith alchemy and had mastered the art of manipulating midichlorians, microscopic life forms that enable beings to connect with the Force. Through his studies, he discovered that by manipulating midichlorians, he could extend life, prevent death, and potentially even create life itself. His research into these areas was far beyond the understanding of even the most advanced Sith, and he became obsessed with the idea of controlling the very essence of life. However, Plagueis' ultimate goal was not merely to cheat death for himself. He sought to transcend mortality entirely, to reshape the Force itself in a way that would eliminate the dark side's inherent limitations. Plagueis believed that the key to true power lay in the union of life and death, to understand both sides of the Force so completely that he could control all aspects of it. His ultimate ambition was to create a new form of existence, one where the Sith would no longer be bound by the limitations of emotions and attachments, and where life could be created and controlled at will. Plagueis' final secret, however, was never revealed before his death, and this raises the question of what it truly was. Could it have been a deeper manipulation of midichlorians that allowed him to create life itself, bending the Force to his will? Was it the key to the ultimate synthesis of the Force, transcending both the Jedi and Sith philosophies, or perhaps the final secret lay in his discovery of a cosmic power, something beyond the Force itself, a force that could reshape time, space, or even the nature of reality? The galaxy may never know the full extent of what Plagueis uncovered, but the implications of his knowledge were far-reaching. Sidious, in his fear and ambition, murdered Plagueis to take his place and prevent the secret from being shared with anyone else. Yet, even in death, Plagueis' teachings would continue to echo throughout the galaxy. Sidious, in his relentless quest for power, would unknowingly continue Plagueis' work, using the dark side of the Force to manipulate and control, but never fully understanding the true extent of what his master had uncovered. Sidious's rise to power was in part due to the knowledge he inherited from Plagueis, but the true secret remained buried, potentially a secret capable of granting unimaginable power, but one that could also destroy the very fabric of the galaxy if it fell into the wrong hands. Some theorize that Plagueis' final secret may have been connected to a greater cosmic mystery, the manipulation of time itself, the ability to alter or transcend death on a galactic scale. Perhaps it was this secret that led to Sidious' eventual downfall, as he unknowingly continued down the path laid out by his master, never fully realizing the danger that came with Plagueis' discovery. The unanswered questions surrounding Darth Plagueis' final secret continue to haunt the Star Wars universe, leaving fans to wonder if it holds the key to understanding the true nature of the Force, life, and death. Could Plagueis have truly discovered a way to transcend mortality, or was his final secret something even more profound, something that could alter the fate of the galaxy itself? We may never know, But one thing is clear: Plagueis' legacy, both the knowledge he uncovered and the power he sought to wield, is one of the galaxy's greatest mysteries, one that continues to influence the galaxy long after his death at the hands of his own apprentice. The final secret of Darth Plagueis, hidden in the shadows, might just be the missing piece in understanding the galaxy's deeper cosmic forces, and it may hold the key to future events that even Sidious, and perhaps even the Jedi, could never have foreseen. The mystery of Darth Plagueis' final secret goes beyond his pursuit of immortality and his mastery over midichlorians. While these concepts were central to his studies, his true ambition lay in the very nature of life itself, not just as something to control, but as a force to be reshaped and remade. Plagueis believed that the Sith's greatest mistake was their failure to truly understand the balance of the Force, especially the potential of the dark side. In his eyes, the Jedi's fear of attachment, emotion, and the dark side only limited their potential. He sought a complete and all-encompassing knowledge of the Force, one that did not rely on dogma or the rigid structure of the Jedi Order. What made his discovery so dangerous wasn't merely his ability to control life and death, but the fact that he believed he could transcend the very essence of mortality. For himself, his apprentice, and possibly even the galaxy at large. The key to his final secret, however, was likely the discovery of a deeper aspect of the Force, something beyond the manipulation of life and death, beyond even the Sith's usual mastery of the dark side. The possibility that Plagueis could manipulate time itself is one of the most compelling theories about his secret. If Plagueis had unlocked a way to alter or control the flow of time, even just in small ways, it would have fundamentally changed the power dynamics in the galaxy. The ability to manipulate time could mean that one could reverse death, alter fates, and change the very course of history. This secret, if it existed, would have allowed its possessor not just to dominate the present, but also to rewrite the past and control the future, giving them an unparalleled power over the galaxy. Sidious, in his ambition, may have seen this potential but feared it at the same time, knowing that such power would threaten his own plans to rule the galaxy. This fear of losing control over a power so immense could have been the catalyst for his betrayal. Yet, the irony of Sidious's actions is that in killing Plagueis, he not only robbed the galaxy of its final secret, but he also ensured that he would be forever bound to the very teachings of his master. Sidious was driven by the same ambitions: to control, to manipulate, and to dominate. But he lacked the understanding of the full scope of what Plagueis had discovered. Sidious's reliance on the dark side, his belief that control was the ultimate path to power, blinded him to the possibility that Plagueis' secret could have been something far more profound. Sidious's obsession with becoming the ultimate Sith Lord, and his desire to impose his vision of order on the galaxy, led him to discard his master without fully comprehending the deeper truths Plagueis had uncovered. Sidious's reign as emperor, though marked by his undeniable power, was ultimately a product of his narrow understanding of the Force. While Plagueis sought a balance between the light and dark, Sidious was consumed by the dark side, which ultimately led to his downfall. His ignorance of Plagueis' final secret ensured that the galaxy would continue down a path of conflict and destruction rather than achieving the true balance that Plagueis had envisioned. In the wake of Plagueis' death, the galaxy continued its cycle of violence and conflict. The Sith, led by Sidious, eventually gained control of the galaxy, but at a great cost. The Force remained unbalanced, with the light side and dark side locked in eternal opposition. The Jedi, despite their efforts to preserve peace and harmony, could not overcome the Sith's tyranny, and the galaxy was plunged into darkness, for decades. Sidious's reign was characterized by manipulation, fear, and control, but it was never the harmonious balance that Plagueis had sought to create. Plagueis, in his final moments, may have known that his secret would be buried with him, that Sidious would never fully understand it, and that his vision of a balanced galaxy would remain just that, a vision. But the potential of his final secret did not die with him. As the galaxy entered the era of the New Republic, new generations of Force-sensitive beings would begin to question the old ways of the Jedi and the Sith. The teachings of the lost Jedi and the legacy of Plagueis's discoveries would resonate with those who sought a deeper understanding of the Force. These individuals, unbound by the dogma of the past, would begin to seek a path that embraced both the light and dark sides of the Force. They would strive to find balance, as Plagueis had envisioned, but without the mistakes that had led to his downfall. The resurgence of Plagueis's knowledge would not come immediately, but would emerge slowly over time, influencing those who were ready to understand the true nature of the Force. The Force Walkers, as they would come to be known, would represent the synthesis of the Jedi and Sith philosophies. These individuals would not view the light and dark as opposing forces, but as complementary aspects of the same whole. They would understand that true power lay in the mastery of both sides of the Force, and that neither side could be suppressed or rejected without consequence. Their ability to use both the light and dark sides of the Force would make them more powerful than either the Jedi or Sith could have ever imagined. But their power would not be about domination or control. Rather, it would be about understanding, acceptance, and balance. While the rise of the Force Walkers would be seen as a threat by the remnants of the Sith, it would be a beacon of hope for those who sought peace and unity in the galaxy. The Jedi Order, too, would begin to realize that their old methods were insufficient. They would come to understand that true peace could not be achieved through suppression or denial, but through embracing the full spectrum of the Force. These new Jedi would learn from Plagueis's mistakes, recognizing that their attachment to the light side was as limiting as the Sith's obsession with the dark. They would seek a deeper connection to the Force, one that transcended the old conflicts and would help guide the galaxy toward a new era of balance. However, the ultimate legacy of Plagueis's final secret may lie in the fact that his knowledge was never fully understood by any single individual. While Sidious's ambitions ensured that Plagueis's vision never came to fruition, the true secret was never meant to be revealed all at once. It was a knowledge that had to be discovered, piece by piece, over time, by those who were ready to accept it. The final secret was not just about immortality, nor was it simply about controlling life and death. It was about understanding the Force in its entirety, recognizing that both light and dark were integral to the galaxy's balance. And though Plagueis's final secret was lost to history, it was not forgotten. It would return not through the Sith or the Jedi, but through the individuals who sought a new path, guided by the lessons of the lost Jedi and the hidden knowledge of the Sith. In this way, Plagueis's legacy and his final secret would ultimately shape the future of the galaxy, leading it toward an era where the Force was no longer divided, but united. The resurgence of Plagueis's final secret would not come without its challenges. As the galaxy's understanding of the Force expanded beyond the old Jedi-Sith dichotomy, factions within both the Jedi and the Sith would resist the rise of a new path. The idea of embracing both light and dark, rather than choosing one or the other, would strike at the very core of the galaxy's power structures. The Sith, despite their history of destruction and domination, would find themselves in a precarious position. They had long been consumed by their obsession with the dark side, using it as a means to control, manipulate, and destroy. Plagueis's discovery of balance, where both the light and dark aspects of the Force were necessary for true mastery, would have disrupted the Sith's central philosophy. For the Sith, Plagueis's final secret would be both a revelation and a threat. The idea that the dark side was not the only path to ultimate power would be difficult for many Sith Lords to accept. Their very identity was built around the notion that the dark side was the key to strength and that the light side represented weakness, restraint, and denial. For many Sith, to accept that the dark side could only be understood in balance with the light side would be to deny the very foundation of their existence. The Sith would therefore face a choice: adapt to the new understanding of the Force, or perish as an outdated, irrelevant ideology. Sidious, as the ultimate Sith Lord, would also find himself at a crossroads. While he had murdered Plagueis to seize his power, he would ultimately fail to comprehend the full extent of his master's teachings. Sidious had spent his entire life mastering the dark side and using it to control others. His ambitions, rooted in domination and fear, were far from Plagueis's vision of a galaxy where the Force was in balance. Sidious's ignorance of Plagueis's deeper knowledge would ensure that his reign as emperor remained rooted in fear and destruction, never achieving the kind of harmony that Plagueis had sought. In his obsession with controlling everything, Sidious would continue to underestimate the potential of the full spectrum of the Force, leaving him vulnerable to those who sought to wield it in ways he could not predict. As the legacy of Plagueis's teachings spread through the galaxy, it would not just influence the Sith and Jedi, but also the more neutral, Force-sensitive individuals who had been previously overlooked by both orders. These individuals, often rejected by the Jedi for their emotional attachments, or by the Sith for their reluctance to embrace the dark side, would be the first to embrace Plagueis's philosophy of balance. The Force Walkers, as they were called, would come to represent a new way forward for the galaxy. They would not be defined by the rigidity of the Jedi or the corruption of the Sith, but by their ability to balance both light and dark aspects of the Force, mastering them without falling prey to either extreme. The Force Walkers' philosophy would challenge the old power structures. The Jedi, though reformed in their thinking, would still struggle with the idea of acknowledging emotions and attachments as integral parts of their connection to the Force. Their deep-rooted belief that these attachments led to the dark side would be difficult to overcome. The Jedi would need time to adapt and learn that true mastery of the Force required not just control, but understanding and acceptance of all aspects of one's being. For the Jedi, the teachings of the Lost Jedi and Plagueis's final secret would be a revelation that would force them to re-examine their purpose and their methods. The Jedi Order's future would no longer be defined by a rigid code of conduct, but by a more flexible, inclusive approach to the Force, one that accepted emotions, attachments, and personal growth as vital elements of the path to enlightenment. On the other hand, the Sith would be more resistant to this new understanding. The remnants of the Sith, those who had survived the Empire's fall, would be deeply threatened by the rise of the Force Walkers. For the Sith, the dark side had always been about power, about seizing control and dominating others. The idea that power could be gained through balance rather than domination would strike at the heart of the Sith philosophy. The Sith Lords, who still clung to their old ways, would see the Force Walkers as heretics, challenging everything they had ever believed about the Force. These Sith would either attempt to destroy the Force Walkers or try to co-opt their teachings, but they would be ultimately doomed by their inability to let go of their desire for power. In the larger context of galactic politics, the rise of the Force Walkers would spark significant shifts in the power structures. The New Republic, struggling to rebuild after the Empire's collapse, would find itself caught between the Jedi, the Sith, and the emerging Force-sensitive factions that now existed outside the traditional binary. Political leaders who had once relied on the Jedi to maintain peace would find themselves questioning the Jedi's role in a galaxy where balance, rather than control, was the new guiding principle. The Republic would need to reconsider its stance on the Jedi and the Sith, acknowledging that the galaxy could no longer be divided into clear-cut camps. The Jedi would be forced to work alongside the Force Walkers, or risk being sidelined in the larger struggle for balance. The galaxy's future would thus hinge on the acceptance of this new philosophy. The Force Walkers, though not seeking power in the traditional sense, would be instrumental in bringing about a new era of peace. Their approach to the Force, one that was about understanding, balance, and unity, would allow them to bridge the divide between the Jedi and Sith, creating a new movement that transcended the old conflict. Over time, the Force Walkers would become the new spiritual leaders of the galaxy, guiding both Force-sensitive individuals and non-Force-sensitive beings toward a path of understanding and cooperation. The most profound consequence of Plagueis's final secret, however, would be its eventual realization that the true power of the Force was not about domination or submission, but about harmony. This realization would unite the galaxy's most powerful Force users, Jedi, Sith, and Force Walkers alike, in a common cause. Their collective understanding of the Force would create a new galaxy, one where the past conflicts between light and dark were finally put to rest, and where true peace was not an illusion but a living reality. In the end, Plagueis's final secret would not be a weapon of destruction, but a path toward salvation. It would be the key to understanding the Force in its truest, most profound form, and the galaxy's future would be defined by how its people chose to embrace that understanding. The knowledge that Plagueis uncovered, buried with him after Sidious's betrayal, would continue to shape the galaxy long after his death, emerging in the hearts and minds of those who sought balance, wisdom, and unity. It was not simply the knowledge of immortality, nor even the power to control life and death, but the realization that the Force, in all its complexity, was meant to bring harmony to the galaxy, a lesson that would shape the fate of the galaxy for generations to come. As the Force Walkers and other Force-sensitive groups began to rise in prominence, the galaxy would inevitably enter a phase of profound transformation. The days of the Jedi-Sith binary would fade, giving way to new philosophical and spiritual movements. But this evolution would not come without its challenges. New factions, built upon the understanding of the Force as a balanced entity, would emerge, some hoping to use the knowledge for peace, others for power. The remnants of both the Jedi and the Sith orders would have to navigate this shifting landscape, where old assumptions no longer held sway. One of the most intriguing aspects of Plagueis's final secret would be the potential for it to affect not only Force-sensitive individuals, but the very nature of the galaxy itself. Through his discovery, Plagueis might have uncovered a way to influence not just the Force, but the fabric of reality, how events unfold, how the future can be shaped, and perhaps even how time itself might be bent to the will of its user. Such knowledge, if wielded by the right individuals, could grant them the ability to affect major galactic events before they even happened, creating a kind of future-seeing power. The implications of such an ability would not be limited to simply reading the future, but would open the door to manipulating events on a cosmic scale. If Plagueis had discovered a method to subtly influence or even manipulate the course of history through the Force, it would make his final secret a powerful tool in the hands of anyone capable of comprehending it. Plagueis himself, in his obsessive quest to control life and death, may have sought this ability to keep his power intact, to prevent his downfall, or to ensure that his vision of galactic domination could come to fruition, regardless of the obstacles in his way. Yet, upon his death, this knowledge would have been left behind, like a seed, waiting to be uncovered by those who sought true mastery of the Force. While Sidious murdered Plagueis, there were others who would seek out the remnants of Plagueis's knowledge, unaware of its true potential. It is not impossible to think that certain Force-sensitive beings, either independently or as part of larger movements, would begin to uncover the fragments of Plagueis's final secret. As the galaxy recovered from the collapse of the Empire and the rise of the New Republic, these individuals might find themselves drawn to the knowledge that had been left behind by the Sith Lord. The legacy of Plagueis would continue to resonate, guiding the actions of those who sought more than just personal power. They sought control over the very destiny of the galaxy. Among those who might begin to explore this knowledge could be Luke Skywalker, the Jedi Knight, who had played a pivotal role in ending the Sith Empire. As the New Republic began to rebuild, Luke would be faced with the challenge of reviving the Jedi Order in a galaxy that had been shaped by the very forces he fought against. His idealism would conflict with the harsher realities of the galaxy. Luke, always seeking to understand the deeper aspects of the Force, would likely encounter the teachings of the Force Walkers. His own experiences, from battling the Sith to facing the shadow of his own father, Darth Vader, would make him uniquely suited to grasp the broader concept of balance. Luke's challenge would not simply be to rebuild the Jedi, but to reconcile the lessons of the past with the emerging knowledge of the future. Luke would eventually realize that the Jedi's old teachings, while valuable, were incomplete. He would begin to understand that true mastery of the Force did not lie in avoiding emotions or attachments, but in learning to control them. Understanding that the balance of the Force required acknowledging both its light and dark aspects. Luke would ultimately face a dilemma. Should he continue to build the Jedi Order as a tool for peace, or should he embrace a new path, one that allows the Jedi to evolve beyond their historical limitations? In seeking to revive the Jedi, he would also become a key figure in shaping the galaxy's relationship with the Force, a relationship that would define the future. While Luke Skywalker might be the most obvious figure in the legacy of the lost Jedi and Plagueis's teachings, there would be others who would take a different path. Not all who found the knowledge of Plagueis would be noble or well-intentioned. The galaxy would also see the rise of darker figures, individuals who would seek to manipulate this powerful knowledge for their own gain. These individuals might come from the remnants of the Sith, or even from new factions formed in the wake of the Empire's fall. These dark users of the Force would not seek to conquer or dominate in the traditional Sith way. Instead, they would see Plagueis's final secret as a means to reshape the universe itself. They might believe that to achieve true peace, they must control the very flow of time and destiny. The rise of these dark figures would pose a significant threat to the galaxy. If Plagueis' secret truly involved the ability to manipulate time or alter the future, these dark users would have the means to shape events according to their desires. Rather than conquering worlds, they would seek to bend reality itself to their will, creating a new order based on their understanding of Plagueis' teachings. The implications for the galaxy would be devastating. For the first time, the Sith would no longer need armies or planets to conquer. They would have the power to shape events long before they occurred, undermining the galaxy's stability in ways never before imagined. This knowledge would create a delicate balance. Those who sought to use it for good would fight to prevent those who would exploit it for their own gain. As the conflict unfolded, the line between Jedi and Sith would become increasingly blurred. Jedi, Sith, and Force walkers alike would all find themselves grappling with the legacy of Plagueis and his final secret, struggling to control, understand, and preserve the balance of the Force that had once seemed so certain but was now irrevocably changed. The ultimate question the galaxy would face is whether it could survive the emergence of this new, profound knowledge. Could the galaxy overcome the temptation to manipulate the fabric of reality for personal gain? Would the Jedi and Sith be able to reconcile their pasts with the new truths that Plagueis had uncovered? Or would the galaxy once again fall into chaos as the old powers tried to control the flow of time, destiny, and the Force itself? The answer lies in the choice of those who seek Plagueis's final secret. Will they continue to use the Force to dominate and control, or will they learn to wield it in harmony, achieving the true balance that Plagueis had always sought? The galaxy's future, shaped by the ultimate knowledge of the Sith Lord, would depend on this decision, a decision that would either restore peace to the galaxy or plunge it into a new age of turmoil and power struggles. As the galaxy entered a new era following the fall of the Sith Empire, the revelation of Darth Plagueis's final secret would become an increasingly significant factor in galactic politics and the balance of the Force. The power to manipulate time and control destiny, should it be fully understood, had the potential to reshape the very structure of the galaxy. Yet its emergence would not be immediate. Rather, it would seep into the galaxy's consciousness like an ancient hidden tide, gradually influencing those sensitive to the Force. Those who had access to this knowledge could change the course of history with the ability to correct past mistakes, alter future outcomes, or even undo the rise and fall of entire civilizations. But the most immediate consequence of Plagueis's secret would be its ripple effect on the new generations of Force-sensitive beings. With the old order of Jedi and Sith fading into memory, a new wave of potential inheritors of Plagueis's knowledge would emerge. Individuals who were neither beholden to the dark side's thirst for power, nor the Jedi's stringent rules of detachment. These Force users would take the teachings of the Force walkers, who represented a synthesis of the old orders and a completely new vision. The Force walkers, embracing both the light and dark aspects of the Force, would struggle to reconcile their practices with the complexities of galactic politics and the questions of morality raised by their new knowledge. Their challenge was not simply understanding the nature of the Force, but using it wisely. They would find themselves caught between opposing ideologies, each group vying for influence over the future. The New Republic, having emerged in the wake of the Empire's collapse, would be the first to feel the shifting tides. Though it had defeated the Sith, the remnants of Sidious's empire were still felt in the form of isolated warlords and Sith loyalists. These fragments, though defeated in battle, would not so easily be eradicated. In the midst of this fragile peace, a new political and spiritual movement would begin to rise, a faction that sought to restore the Sith Empire, not through sheer military might, but through the acquisition of Plagueis's knowledge. These would be Sith remnants, disillusioned with Sidious's rule and determined to understand Plagueis's ultimate legacy. Their aim would not be to continue the dark domination of the galaxy, but to use the knowledge of time manipulation to alter the events that led to the Sith's ultimate downfall. They would see themselves not as conquerors, but as architects of a new order, one that could erase their past mistakes and ensure their future rule. On the other hand, a new generation of Force-sensitive leaders would arise from the ranks of the Force walkers and reformed Jedi. These individuals would reject the dogmatic nature of the past and see the Force as a living, evolving energy, one that connected all things. They would embody the ideals of balance, seeking not to dominate or subjugate, but to guide the galaxy toward a path of true understanding. The rise of this new order, one that transcended the rigid Jedi-Sith dichotomy, would challenge the very fabric of galactic governance. The Force Walkers would propose that the balance of the Force should not be seen as something to be controlled or harnessed, but rather something to be experienced, learned from, and shared. However, not all Force-sensitive individuals would agree with this view. The existence of those who sought to manipulate the timeline itself would create a volatile situation. If Plagueis' secret allowed individuals to change the past or shape the future, the galaxy would no longer be able to operate under the assumption that events were fixed and irreversible. The potential consequences of changing the course of history would be dire. A time-altering Sith faction, convinced of the righteousness of their cause, could manipulate history to ensure their dominance, preventing the rise of the New Republic or any lasting peace in the galaxy. Their interference could create paradoxes where timelines would collide and shift, throwing the galaxy into a state of chaotic uncertainty. On the other hand, the new Jedi Order would be caught between these competing forces. As Luke Skywalker and his followers continued to rebuild the Jedi, they would eventually encounter these new philosophies, particularly as the implications of Plagueis' secret began to surface. Luke, deeply attuned to the Force's evolving nature, would initially struggle with these new ideas. The Jedi's teachings had always been about maintaining balance, but balance in a traditional sense, where emotions and attachments were suppressed to avoid the pull of the dark side. Luke's challenge would be realizing that balance didn't mean neutrality or avoidance, but understanding and acceptance of both the light and the dark. He would recognize that Plagueis' secret, if used responsibly, could provide a way to guide the galaxy into a more enlightened future, where individuals were not divided by the binary struggle between good and evil, but united by their understanding of the Force in its entirety. The greatest test for the galaxy would be whether these new groups, those who sought balance in the Force, could unite the galaxy, or whether the fracture lines of the past would resurface. The galaxy had been torn apart by war after war, often fought by those who misunderstood the true nature of the Force. As the remnants of the Sith and Jedi found themselves forced to adapt to a new world order, the galaxy would stand at a crossroads. Would the knowledge of Plagueis, the ability to manipulate time and destiny, ultimately lead to a new age of peace, or would it open the door to even darker conflicts that would reshape the galaxy forever? With the discovery of this final secret, factions across the galaxy would inevitably clash, not just over who controlled the Force, but over how the Force should be understood. The age of heroes and villains as defined by the Jedi and Sith would come to an end, as those who could embrace the full spectrum of the Force began to lead the charge for the galaxy's future. New alliances would be formed between groups that had once been sworn enemies: the Force Walkers, a hybrid order of Jedi, Sith, and those who had rejected both traditions, would stand as the galaxy's guiding force, mediating between the past and the future, teaching others how to use the Force not to control but to understand. The final secret of Darth Plagueis, the ability to shape destiny itself, would never be fully realized by any one individual. Instead, it would be a collective understanding that evolved over time, influenced by the actions of the galaxy's most powerful Force users. Each generation would add new layers to Plagueis' legacy, transforming it from a tool for domination into a beacon for unity and understanding. And as the galaxy slowly came to terms with the full implications of the secret, the ultimate question would be whether the galaxy could handle the responsibility of wielding such profound power. power that, if used recklessly, could plunge the galaxy into chaos, but if used wisely, could guide it to a future of lasting peace. The outcome of this battle for balance would determine whether the galaxy's legacy was one of war and suffering or peace and understanding. And in this future, the final secret of Darth Plagueis would prove to be not just the key to the past, but the doorway to a new age. An age where the Force no longer divided, but united, shaping the galaxy's future for generations to come. The galaxy's future, as shaped by the eventual discovery and use of Plagueis's final secret, would see a major reconfiguration of power structures. The once dominant Sith and Jedi orders would no longer have a monopoly on the understanding and manipulation of the Force. The rise of Force walkers, those who embraced the full spectrum of the Force, would usher in an era where Force-sensitive beings could work together rather than be divided by the dogmas of light and dark. However, this new philosophical evolution would not come without its obstacles. The most pressing issue would be the inherent danger in wielding such powerful knowledge. Plagueis' final secret, the potential manipulation of time, life, and death, would likely be seen by many as too dangerous to be allowed to flourish. Governments, factions, and even the Force-sensitive individuals themselves would begin to understand the profound impact this knowledge could have on their societies. The Galactic Senate, already struggling to maintain order following the fall of the Empire, would be forced to grapple with the implications of these new revelations. If the power to manipulate time existed, what would prevent individuals from rewriting history to suit their personal agendas? What checks and balances could be put in place to ensure that such power was not misused, especially by those with less noble intentions? The New Republic, striving to stabilize the galaxy and prevent another rise of tyranny, would find itself caught in a moral and political quagmire. The Senate, composed of a wide variety of representatives from across the galaxy, would likely be divided. On one hand, there would be those who saw Plagueis's knowledge as a necessary tool for progress, a means to correct the mistakes of the past, prevent the rise of future Sith, and ensure the survival of the Republic. On the other hand, there would be a faction that feared the destabilizing consequences of this power, seeing it as a threat to freedom and democracy itself. These politicians would argue that the galaxy's stability could never be guaranteed if time and fate could be altered on a whim. The fear of such power falling into the wrong hands would lead to intense political debates and potentially further fragmentation within the New Republic's government. Jedi leaders, especially those who had come to understand the balance of light and dark, would also find themselves in a difficult position. While they may have embraced the philosophy of balance, they would understand the deep responsibility that came with wielding such power. Luke Skywalker, who had already questioned the traditional Jedi teachings, would struggle with whether or not to incorporate the manipulation of time and fate into the Jedi Code. His goal was never to create an order that ruled over the galaxy, but to guide others toward a better understanding of the Force. The question for Luke and his followers would be how far could they push the boundaries of this new knowledge without repeating the same mistakes of their predecessors. Meanwhile, in the shadows, the remnants of the Sith, scattered across the galaxy and operating in isolation, would see Plagueis's secret as the ultimate tool for revenge. The Sith, who had always embraced their power through the dark side, would now find themselves split. Some would follow Sidious's path, rejecting the idea of balance and seeking to dominate the galaxy as they always had. But others, influenced by Plagueis's teachings, would see the final secret as a means to transcend the old Sith ideals, to not merely control the galaxy but to reshape it, ensuring their rule through mastery of time itself. These Sith remnants, recognizing the danger inherent in controlling such knowledge, would either try to conceal it or to manipulate it for their own ends. The Sith's historical obsession with power would find a new outlet, rewriting history and bending the galaxy's future to their will. As these conflicting forces fought for control of Plagueis's knowledge, the galaxy would descend into a cold war. A war fought not with blasters and armies, but through espionage, philosophy, and the manipulation of the very fabric of time. The Force Walkers, now emerging as a fully realized movement, would attempt to bring a higher understanding of balance to the galaxy. They would seek to use their newfound knowledge, not for domination, but for understanding and unity. Their goal would be to guide the galaxy's leaders, Jedi, Sith, and others, toward seeing the bigger picture, that the Force itself was a force for life, and its balance could only be achieved by embracing both light and dark, without succumbing to either. But the greater question would arise: could the galaxy truly accept this new order? The very foundation of galactic governance had been built on the binary understanding of the Force, with the Jedi and Sith as opposing forces. With the introduction of Plagueis's secret, the galaxy was faced with an entirely new paradigm, one that was neither Jedi nor Sith, but something entirely different. Could the galaxy's people, entrenched in their old ideologies, ever accept this new path? Or would the galaxy forever be torn apart by the struggle to control the deeper, more profound aspects of the Force? The manipulation of time and destiny would also have profound effects on the common people of the galaxy. On a personal level, Force-sensitive individuals who had once been isolated from the greater galactic events would now find themselves on the precipice of discovering their own potential. These individuals, often marginalized by both Jedi and Sith, would begin to realize that they had access to a deeper connection to the Force than ever before. Force-sensitive non-Jedi could begin to forge their own paths, rejecting the old institutions and seeking a new way to engage with the Force, one that was not defined by either the Jedi's detachment or the Sith's lust for power. The consequences of these developments would not be fully felt immediately, but they would begin to shape the galaxy's future political and spiritual evolution. The Force Walkers, guided by Plagueis's teachings, would become the galaxy's new leaders, forming a unified movement that represented a shift away from the conflict of the past. They would work behind the scenes, bringing stability and harmony, quietly guiding the galaxy toward a more enlightened future. However, the dark side of the Force would continue to cast its shadow, and those who sought to manipulate the Force for personal gain would always pose a threat. The key to the galaxy's survival would depend on how well the new leaders could balance the Force, maintain their unity, and ensure that the power to alter time itself was never abused. Plagueis's final secret would, in the end, be the galaxy's greatest test. The ability to change the future, control the past, and manipulate life and death would offer unimaginable potential, but it could also destroy everything. The fate of the galaxy would be determined not by the strength of armies or the size of fleets, but by the wisdom of those who held the knowledge of Plagueis's final secret. And as the galaxy grappled with the implications of this knowledge, it would be forced to answer one final question. Could it wield this power responsibly, or would it fall back into the old cycles of conflict, power, and destruction? As the legacy of Darth Plagueis's final secret began to surface, it became clear that not only the Jedi and Sith, but galactic leaders and ordinary citizens would be irrevocably affected by this new understanding of the Force. The secret that Plagueis had guarded so carefully, and that Sidious had murdered him to suppress, would ultimately shape the galaxy's future by presenting a new path forward. one that could either elevate the galaxy to new heights of understanding or plunge it into a new form of chaos. This knowledge would, in a sense, force the galaxy's inhabitants to evolve, to either embrace the Force's complete spectrum or risk being consumed by its darker aspects. Among those who would be most impacted by Plagueis' secret would be Leia Organa, the former princess turned general in the Rebel Alliance. She had grown up in a galaxy shaped by war, having lived through the Empire's rise, the Rebellion's struggle, and the restoration of the New Republic. Leia, though not traditionally a Force-sensitive individual in the early parts of her life, had shown an innate understanding of balance through her leadership and decisions. With the discovery of Plagueis' secret, Leia would find herself grappling not only with the political implications of this new knowledge, but also with her own connection to the Force, one that had been revealed more fully later in her life. Leia would be caught in a conflict between the galaxy's new, more nuanced view of the Force and the old lessons she had learned from the Jedi. As someone who had seen the consequences of unbridled power, both through her father's role in the Senate and the actions of Darth Vader, she would understand the great responsibility tied to controlling the Force's deeper mysteries. The temptation to use the newfound knowledge of time manipulation for political gain or personal protection would be great. However, Leia's inherent wisdom and sense of justice would likely guide her toward understanding that true peace could only be achieved if this power was wielded with great care and humility. She would perhaps become one of the leading figures in preventing the secret from being used for personal gain, trying to ensure that the galaxy did not fall prey to the same pitfalls of control and fear that had marked the Empire and its Sith masters. Similarly, Han Solo, ever the skeptic, the rogue, the realist, would remain firmly grounded in the practicalities of galactic life. Despite his growing respect for the Force, Han's path would be more about protecting his family and ensuring that the New Republic's stability was not jeopardized by the rise of new dark forces. He would not seek to control the knowledge of Plagueis, but his deep attachment to Leia and their children would inevitably draw him into the greater struggle. Han's role would become that of a protector of those who wished to harness the power responsibly, preventing factions from exploiting it for military or political supremacy. In contrast, the new Jedi Order, under the leadership of Luke Skywalker, would see its greatest challenge since its inception. Luke, already burdened by the weight of rebuilding the Order after the fall of the Empire, would now have to contend with the idea that the Force was far more complex than even he had understood. The Jedi, with their history of adherence to the light side and their rejection of attachments, would have to reconcile their doctrines with the new understanding that Plagueis had uncovered. The idea that the Force could be understood holistically, that the light and dark were not simply opposites but two parts of a unified whole, would be revolutionary to many in the Order. Luke himself would likely be the most profoundly affected by this new knowledge. He had always been the one to challenge the Jedi Code, even as he rebuilt it. But now he would have to consider how far he could push the boundaries of traditional Jedi teachings. Would the Jedi Order need to evolve into something entirely new, something that accepted both the dark and the light as necessary aspects of existence? And if so, would Luke himself be the one to lead this charge? Or would he find that his efforts had gone too far, risking the very peace he had fought to protect? However, Luke's decision would not be made in a vacuum. Leia, as his sister and a powerful leader in her own right, would challenge him in ways only she could. As someone who had witnessed the destructive potential of the Force firsthand through the rise of Darth Vader, she would understand the grave responsibility that came with wielding such power. Leia would argue for caution, for moderation, for preserving the balance of the galaxy, Her political acumen would see the need to govern the knowledge carefully, making sure that it never fell into the wrong hands. Yet, her bond with Luke and their shared experiences would give her an understanding of the sacredness of the Force that few others could grasp. At the same time, the Sith remnants, though scattered, would be the most dangerous faction to the galaxy's newfound balance. Darth Maul, though a shadow of his former self, could emerge as one of the key figures seeking Plagueis' secret, using it to form a new Sith order that combined the dark side with the forbidden knowledge Plagueis had uncovered. Driven by the resentment of his past, Maul would have no intention of creating peace, but rather reshaping the galaxy in the Sith's image, where dark side power ruled supreme. His vision of the Force would be radically different, viewing the dark side as the true path to freedom and empowerment. Unlike Sidious, Maul would see the secret as a way to transcend the boundaries of Sith teachings, merging them with Plagueis' knowledge to potentially gain control over the very fabric of time. The return of such Sith ideals would push the galaxy toward a new era of conflict, but it would also lead to the galactic realization that the struggle for power had evolved. It was no longer about war and armies. It was about the very nature of the Force itself. The future of the galaxy would not just depend on military strength or political maneuvering, but on how the ultimate secret of the Force would be interpreted and used by those who came to understand it. Meanwhile, the Force Walkers, who had come to see the Force as a unified whole, would attempt to bridge the gap between these two opposing ideologies, Jedi and Sith. These new Force users would seek to protect the galaxy from the Sith's rise to power, while trying to guide the Jedi into a new path of enlightenment. The Force Walkers' primary goal would be to prevent the knowledge of Plagueis from being misused, ensuring that the galaxy would not fall into the same cycles of power and destruction that had plagued it for millennia. They would become the neutral force, working behind the scenes, guiding both the Jedi and the Sith toward a path of coexistence rather than division. As the galaxy's struggle continued, it would become evident that the greatest challenge of all was understanding the Force's true potential, not just as a tool for good or evil, but as a living, breathing entity that could either save or destroy the galaxy, depending on how it was used. The battle would not be one of light versus dark, Jedi versus Sith, but a battle of ideology, philosophy, and ultimately the understanding of the Force's deepest mysteries. Plagueis' final secret, hidden and shrouded in darkness, would be the key to unlocking the future of the galaxy, but it would require the galaxy's greatest minds, Jedi, Sith, and Force-sensitive individuals, to understand its profound implications. The legacy of Darth Plagueis would continue to cast its shadow across the galaxy, shaping the future in ways that no one could predict. Whether the galaxy embraced his knowledge and forged a new era of peace, or fell prey to the old cycle of war and destruction, would depend on the choices of those who came into possession of Plagueis' secret, and whether they could resist the temptation to use it for personal gain, or whether they would seek the greater good. As the galaxy grappled with the knowledge of Darth Plagueis' final secret, the tension between the old orders, Jedi and Sith, and the emerging new paths would escalate. Plagueis' discovery, particularly if it involved the manipulation of time and destiny, would create a deep rift in the galaxy's understanding of the Force. This new knowledge would challenge every assumption about the Force, life, and death, forcing individuals to confront difficult choices about the nature of their existence, the galaxy's future, and the fundamental nature of the Force itself. Luke Skywalker, now a seasoned Jedi Master, would find himself at the center of this philosophical and spiritual storm. His previous experiences, both as a young rebel and as the one who redeemed his father, had already exposed him to the complexities of the Force. but the revelation of Plagueis' secret would challenge his core beliefs. Luke had always strived to bring balance to the Force by resurrecting the Jedi Order. His faith in the Jedi Code, emphasizing compassion, detachment, and defense of peace, had been a cornerstone of his efforts. However, the concept that the Force might require a holistic understanding, one that embraced both the light and dark sides in balance, would force Luke to reconsider the foundation upon which he had built his order. The new Jedi under Luke's guidance had been trained in moderation and restraint, but the implications of Plagueis' teachings would suggest that balance wasn't about rejecting emotions or attachments, but learning to wield them wisely. Luke's internal struggle would become one of personal acceptance. Could he lead the Jedi into this new era of Force understanding without losing the principles that had guided him throughout his life? The Jedi Order, under his leadership, would inevitably have to adapt, recognizing that true mastery of the Force lay in embracing all aspects of life, including those that had traditionally been seen as obstacles to Jedi purity. Yet, the political dimension of Luke's challenge would be just as difficult. As Leia Organa, now a prominent leader of the New Republic, saw the galactic landscape shifting, she would become more entrenched in the pragmatic aspects of how such knowledge could affect the New Republic's stability. Having been trained as a diplomat, Leia would understand the dangerous ramifications of such an ideology. Her deep-seated political realism would serve as a grounding force within the Republic, but it also meant she would approach Plagueis' knowledge with caution. She knew all too well that this newfound ability to manipulate time, life, and destiny could lead to tyranny if used irresponsibly, and that not all parties in the galaxy could be trusted with such power. Thus, she would focus on restraining the potential for misuse, advocating for careful governance over this knowledge, ensuring that it did not fall into the hands of those who would use it for domination. Her brother Luke would struggle with the idea of restricting such power, seeing it as a potential force for good that could protect the galaxy from the rise of new threats, while Leia's caution would stem from a lifetime of seeing how power can easily corrupt. Their differing views would set them at odds, creating a rift between the siblings. In one of the galaxy's most consequential moments, the New Republic would be forced to choose between preserving the old Jedi ways or embracing a new understanding that would shift the balance of power, possibly forever. Leia would advocate for guardianship over such knowledge, while Luke might see it as a way to evolve the Jedi into something greater. Meanwhile, Darth Maul, having survived his previous encounters with both the Jedi and the Sith, would find himself drawn back into the galaxy's power struggle. The new Sith remnants, those who had discarded the traditional Sith code and rejected Sidious's vision of galactic domination, would see Plagueis' final secret as the ultimate tool to reshape the galaxy. Maul, now a hardened and insightful warrior, would view the knowledge of time manipulation and life creation as a means to transcend the limits of Sith philosophy. Where Sidious had sought power to dominate the galaxy, Maul would envision a new Sith order, one that embraced this new understanding and used it not for conquest, but for the creation of a new reality. Maul's desire would no longer be merely for vengeance or political power, but for a deeper cosmic power that allowed him to bend the very laws of the universe to his will. Maul's followers would rally around this vision, seeing him as a leader who could break free from the cycles of destruction and rebirth that had plagued the Sith. Plagueis' secret would grant them not just the power to rule, but the ability to reshape time itself, thereby making them the ultimate force of destiny. These dark force users, led by Maul, would represent a stark contrast to the emerging Force Walkers who sought balance and harmony. The galaxy would now face an ideological clash, not just between Jedi and Sith, but between two new forces, one driven by balance and understanding and the other by unfettered power and control. The Force Walkers, now a growing faction of neutral force-sensitive beings, would become the key to the galaxy's future. These individuals would transcend the labels of Jedi and Sith, rejecting both the rigidity of the Jedi Code and the Sith's obsession with power. The Force Walkers, guided by the teachings of Darth Plagueis' final secret, would learn to embrace the Force in its totality, seeking to understand and harness both its light and dark aspects. Their goal would be to bring balance to a galaxy torn apart by division, using the knowledge of life manipulation and time alteration as a tool for unification and peace, not for domination. Yet the Force Walkers' path would not be an easy one. The galaxy's factions would not embrace this new vision easily, and old alliances would be tested. The Jedi Order, still reeling from the implications of their own reformation, would question whether to accept the Force Walkers as allies or rivals. The New Republic, recognizing the strategic potential of such a powerful movement, would debate whether to integrate the Force Walkers into its political framework or to suppress them as a threat to galactic order. The Sith remnants, led by Maul, would see the Force Walkers as a direct threat to their vision of a new Sith Empire. As these forces moved across the galaxy, each would attempt to control or contain the potential of Plagueis' secret, unaware that its ultimate consequence might not be in who controls it, but in how it changes the very course of the galaxy's future. And so, as the galaxy stood at a crossroads, with the balance of the Force now in flux, the consequences of Plagueis' final secret would unfold. Would the galaxy embrace this new path of understanding, or would it be torn asunder by those who sought to control the knowledge for their own gain? The true test would be whether the galaxy's leaders, whether Jedi, Sith, or Force Walkers, could resist the temptation to use such power selfishly. The key to the future lay in understanding that Plagueis' secret was never about controlling the galaxy, but about understanding it. The final secret was a gateway to true peace, if only its wielders could embrace balance and resist the seduction of absolute power. As the knowledge of Darth Plagueis' final secret began to circulate, it would not be confined to just the leaders and the Force-sensitive elite. The common folk of the galaxy, the countless inhabitants of various star systems, would be profoundly affected by this knowledge. Not in the literal sense of manipulating time or life directly, but in how they understood the nature of their world. The Force Walkers, now viewed as the mediators of this new understanding, would attempt to teach the galaxy that the power to change was not merely for the privileged few, but something that could influence everyone's fate. A revolution in thought would sweep across the galaxy as citizens and leaders began to question the existing structures of power. The Force Walkers would spread their message not just through the high echelons of power, but also to the outer rim, to places that had long been ignored by the central powers. People would begin to understand that they were not merely subjects of fate, but had the potential to shape their destinies. This newfound awareness would spark a widespread desire for empowerment, and in some cases, rebellion against the established powers that had maintained their dominance through centuries of war and manipulation. However, this awakening would not be without its risks. The temptation to manipulate this new knowledge for personal gain would be great. As Plagueis' secret became more widely known, factions of the disillusioned, those who had long suffered under the Empire, the Sith and the Republic, would see an opportunity to seize this power. Some would turn to it to exact vengeance on those who had wronged them, others to gain control of systems and resources that had long been denied to them. This power imbalance would give rise to new, more dangerous factions whose ambitions for domination would be framed as noble causes of liberation. These would be individuals or groups who, rather than embracing the deeper understanding of balance and unity that the Force Walkers sought, would instead try to bend time and alter history to bring about their vision of what the galaxy should be. Simultaneously, new leaders would rise, who had no allegiance to the old Jedi-Sith divide. These would be individuals who, upon learning the full extent of Plagueis's discoveries, would see themselves as the heirs to his vision of reshaping the galaxy. They would be driven not by the desire for raw power, but by a deep conviction that the galaxy needed to evolve. These leaders would come from all walks of life. Some would be ex-Jedi, others would have once been Sith, and some would be entirely new figures, born outside the traditional dichotomy of the Force. Their unity would stem from a common belief that Plagueis's knowledge could transcend the old wars between light and dark, bringing about an era of profound transformation. However, the issue of control over such knowledge would lead to unavoidable conflict. The remnants of the Sith, seeing the Force Walkers as a threat to their own power and legacy, would attempt to manipulate this new understanding of the Force in a destructive manner. The Sith, with their deep desire to dominate and control, would view Plagueis's ability to manipulate time as the ultimate weapon. Some would try to weaponize this knowledge, creating paradoxes in time and rewriting history to suit their needs. The creation of time-based weapons, such as altering the course of past wars or shifting the outcomes of battles, would be a key element in their strategy to re-establish Sith rule. If the Sith managed to unlock these powers, they could render any opposition, including the Jedi and New Republic, obsolete by manipulating history to erase their enemies from existence. The danger of time manipulation also loomed large in the hands of those who wished to prevent suffering rather than cause it. There would be leaders who, seeing the potential for change, would attempt to erase the mistakes of the past, such as the rise of the Empire or the atrocities of the Sith, in order to create a utopia. But in doing so, they would face the greatest risk of all, the corruption of their ideals. The galaxy's understanding of balance would become increasingly fragmented as more and more individuals used the knowledge of Plagueis's secret to justify personal, political, and social goals. This divide would deepen, leading to increasing civil unrest and the potential for galactic civil war, not fought with weapons, but with the manipulation of time, memory, and identity. Despite the turmoil, the Force Walkers would rise as the voice of reason amidst the chaos. They would act as the custodians of Plagueis's final secret, ensuring it was not abused or twisted for personal gain. However, the path forward would not be easy. The Force Walkers, in their pursuit of balance, would have to confront not only the external threats posed by those who wished to control the Force for power, but also the internal challenge of ensuring that their own understanding of balance was not corrupted by the very knowledge they sought to preserve. The temptation to wield time-manipulating powers for noble ends, even with the best intentions, would always exist. Some of the Force Walkers might fall into the same trap as the Jedi and Sith before them, thinking they could control time for the greater good, yet losing their way and becoming just another faction seeking to impose order on a galaxy that had already suffered from too much control. In this new era, the galaxy would be reborn. No longer would the Jedi and Sith stand as polar opposites, fighting for control over the Force. The galaxy would be led by those who had come to understand that the Force, its light and dark sides, were not to be mastered or suppressed, but to be embraced. The challenge would lie not in wielding ultimate power over the Force, but in responsibly managing the knowledge of Plagueis's final secret. As different factions, movements, and leaders fought to shape the galaxy's future, it would become clear that balance was not simply an ideal, it was a living, breathing truth, a force that existed in the connections between all living things. The ultimate resolution would rest in the hands of those who understood that true power came not from manipulating time or shaping destinies, but from the wisdom to see the greater picture, to understand that true peace comes not from control, but from mutual respect, understanding, and cooperation. Plagueis' secret would not merely be a tool for domination, but a lesson that, in the hands of the right leaders, could guide the galaxy toward an era of peace and understanding that had once seemed impossible. As the knowledge of Darth Plagueis' final secret spread throughout the galaxy, its impact was inevitable. It was not just the Force-sensitive beings who felt its reverberations, but all those who lived under the shadow of past conflicts and power struggles. The old power structures, the Jedi, the Sith, the Galactic Republic, and later the New Republic, had long defined the galaxy's way of life. However, with the advent of Plagueis' knowledge, the galaxy would face an upheaval that would not only challenge the very foundations of these institutions, but also redefine what it meant to wield the Force and control destiny. The Jedi Order, now trying to rebuild after the fall of the Sith Empire, would face its greatest challenge in reconciling its traditional teachings with the new revelations about the Force. The old Jedi Code, which emphasized detachment, emotional restraint, and avoidance of attachment, would be increasingly seen as insufficient for the complexities of the galaxy's future. The lessons of Plagueis' final secret, the power to manipulate time, life, and death, would force the Jedi to confront their own limitations. Could they continue to follow a code that rejected the complexities of life, or would they evolve into something more? The new Jedi, influenced by the teachings of the Force Walkers, would likely embrace the balance between the light and dark sides, realizing that the suppression of emotions and attachments was an obstacle to true understanding. For Luke Skywalker, the evolution of the Jedi Order would be a personal journey as well. Having been raised with a deep belief in the need for balance within the Force, Luke's role as the leader of the new Jedi Order would be marked by internal conflict. The knowledge of Plagueis' final secret would be both a gift and a burden. While it would give Luke the tools to elevate the Jedi to a new understanding, it would also force him to grapple with the potential consequences of wielding such profound knowledge. Would embracing both the light and dark sides of the Force make the Jedi more powerful, or would it lead to their eventual descent into corruption, as had happened with the Sith? Luke's journey would also bring him into conflict with those Sith remnants, who were eager to use Plagueis' secret for their own agenda of domination. The Sith, having long viewed the dark side as the ultimate path to power, would see the ability to manipulate life, death, and time as a means to bring about their ultimate victory. They would recognize that the power to alter destiny itself could tip the balance in their favor, a secret they could use to re-establish their rule over the galaxy, not through open conquest, but through subtle manipulation of events. Darth Maul, now a shadow of his former self, would be one of the most dangerous figures to emerge from the shadows of the Sith. Having spent years in isolation and bitterness after his defeat at the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi and later the rise of Sidious, Maul would understand the true potential of Plagueis' secret. He would no longer be driven by a lust for power in the traditional Sith sense. Instead, his interest in Plagueis' secret would be rooted in his desire to reshape the galaxy and bring an end to the cycles of destruction that had defined both the Jedi and the Sith. Maul's understanding of the secret would go beyond simple time manipulation. He would seek to alter the very essence of galactic power. His new Sith Empire, or perhaps a new form of Sith order, would not be about destruction but about changing the course of history to create a reality where the Sith would never fall again. Maul's rise would mark a significant shift. Unlike Sidious, whose Sith empire had relied on political manipulation and brute force, Maul's vision of Sith supremacy would involve reshaping the very fabric of reality. He would look to alter events from the past, perhaps even prevent the rise of the Jedi, or alter key moments of galactic history that led to the downfall of the Sith. This manipulation of time and destiny would create a dynamic where Maul was no longer just an agent of chaos, but a potential architect of a new era, one in which the Sith would be victorious, not by force, but by the subtle use of time itself. Meanwhile, the Force Walkers would continue their mission to guide the galaxy toward balance and unity. This new movement, which sought to unite the teachings of both the Jedi and Sith while transcending their limitations, would quickly become a powerful force in galactic affairs. Unlike the Jedi, who had long been bound by strict dogmas, or the Sith, whose obsession with power had led to their downfall, the Force Walkers would focus on the wisdom of balance, understanding that true mastery of the Force could only be achieved by embracing both light and dark, not suppressing them. The Force Walkers' rise would be met with significant opposition. Those who held on to the old traditions, whether Jedi or Sith, would see the Force Walkers as a threat to their established beliefs. The Jedi, in particular, would struggle to accept this new philosophy, having spent millennia rejecting the dark side. Even with Luke's influence, some Jedi would cling to the old ways, refusing to acknowledge the darker aspects of the Force as a part of the natural order. These Jedi would see the Force Walkers' teachings as heretical and dangerous, even though their ultimate goal was not to conquer or dominate, but to bring peace and understanding. However, the greatest threat would likely come from the galactic powers that had been established since the rise of the Republic and the Empire. Governments, large corporations, and militaries would fear that these new teachings would weaken their grip on control. They would see the Force Walkers' vision of balance as a potential disruption to the existing political order, where power had always been concentrated in the hands of the few. The fear of losing control would lead some of the most powerful galactic factions to resist the rise of this new movement, seeing it as a challenge to their authority. These governments and corporations, unwilling to cede power, would seek to suppress the Force Walkers' influence, perhaps by force, to prevent their rise to power. In the background of this ideological conflict, the New Republic would find itself facing both external and internal pressures. While the government had emerged victorious over the Empire, it was not immune to the turbulence caused by these new revelations about the Force. Leia Organa, ever the political strategist, would be forced to navigate this shifting terrain. Her understanding of galactic politics and her connection to the Force through her lineage would place her in a unique position to influence the future of the galaxy. As tensions between the Jedi, Sith, and Force Walkers mounted, Leia would work tirelessly to create a framework that could ensure peace without compromising the freedom of the galaxy's people. Ultimately, the galaxy would face a critical choice. Would it embrace the true nature of the Force, accepting the duality of light and dark, and seek balance? Or would it fall back into the cycle of division that had defined the conflict between Jedi and Sith for millennia? The galaxy's future would depend on whether the new generations of Force-sensitive individuals could wield Plagueis's final secret with wisdom and restraint, or whether they would succumb to the temptation of power, repeating the mistakes of the past. The final secret of Darth Plagueis, buried in darkness for so long, would prove to be the galaxy's ultimate test. It was not about the control of the Force or even the ability to manipulate time, but about the choices made by those who wielded that knowledge. Could the galaxy move beyond the struggles of the past and embrace a new, balanced vision for the future? Or would the cycle of conflict and manipulation continue, as new factions sought to rewrite the past and reshape destiny for their own purposes? As the galaxy struggled to come to terms with Darth Plagueis' final secret, the balance of power would begin to shift in unpredictable and potentially catastrophic ways. The force of history had long been shaped by the cycles of light and dark, the Jedi and the Sith, the rebellion and the Empire. But now, with the secret knowledge of the Force's manipulation of time and destiny emerging, the very nature of reality itself was in flux. The galaxy's future would no longer be shaped by simply defeating one foe or another. It would be about controlling the very fabric of existence. The temptation to alter timelines, reshape events, and erase mistakes would be too great for some to resist. Factions across the galaxy would form around differing interpretations of Plagueis' teachings. The Force Walkers, who had begun as a movement for balance and understanding, would now become a unifying force in the galaxy, bringing together disparate groups of Force-sensitive beings and others who sought a more harmonious future. Their understanding of the Force as something that transcended light and dark would allow them to act as mediators between the different factions that now sought to control or suppress this knowledge. They would work toward the restoration of balance and understanding, but they would face immense resistance from various corners of the galaxy. The Sith remnants, still fiercely loyal to the ideals of Plagueis, but also bent on their own ambitions, would rise in opposition to the Force Walkers. Their leader, potentially Darth Maul, or another Sith Lord, would take up the mantle of Plagueis' vision, not to destroy the galaxy, but to reshape it. With the knowledge of time manipulation, the Sith would see themselves as the ultimate architects of destiny, aiming to construct a galaxy where the Sith were unchallenged in their power. Their vision would be one of a new empire, where the Sith would bend time itself to their will, altering past events and ensuring that they would never again be defeated. This ambition would lead to massive galactic instability, as the Sith sought to rewrite history and control the very flow of events. The Force Walkers, though attempting to maintain balance, would find themselves at odds with the Sith, who would see them as a threat to their domination of the galaxy. The New Republic, struggling to maintain unity in the aftermath of the Empire's fall, would find itself in the midst of this brewing conflict. The political leadership of the Republic would be torn between those who sought to suppress the knowledge of Plagueis' secret, fearing the chaos it could bring, and those who saw it as a potential tool for peace. The New Republic's Senate, comprised of various political factions, would struggle with how to approach the issue of time manipulation and the control of destiny. Should the Republic take a stand against the Sith remnants and attempt to control or even destroy Plagueis' secret knowledge? Or should they embrace the Force Walkers, using their wisdom to guide the galaxy into a new era? The Republic would be on the brink of collapse as factions within it would push toward radically different paths, unable to agree on how to handle such an existential threat. As these forces collided, the galactic populace, those who had lived in the shadows of the Jedi and Sith for so long, would begin to demand their own voice in the conflict. The discovery of Plagueis' secret would inspire revolutionary movements across the galaxy, from the poorest sectors to the richest. Ordinary citizens would begin to realize that the Force was no longer something that could only be controlled by a select few. The people would demand access to this knowledge, and this new understanding of their connection to the Force would create mass movements in the streets. Those without the Force would now believe that they, too, could have a role to play in shaping the destiny of the galaxy. As uprisings spread, it would become clear that the galaxy's political and social structures were on the verge of collapse. The question would become not whether the Jedi, Sith, or Force Walkers could win, but whether the galaxy could survive the upheaval that Plagueis' secret would inevitably bring. The Force Walkers, caught between these competing factions, would find themselves struggling to maintain their own unity. Though their original goal had been to restore balance, they would now have to confront the dark realities of the galaxy's new situation. The knowledge they sought to protect and promote, the knowledge of time manipulation, would lead them into a moral quagmire. Could they prevent the knowledge from being used for personal gain? Could they keep it from falling into the hands of those who would abuse it for domination? Or would they fall into the same traps as the Jedi and the Sith before them, allowing the power of the Force to dictate the galaxy's fate rather than guiding it? At the heart of these growing conflicts would be Luke Skywalker, struggling not just with his Jedi Order's place in the galaxy, but with his own role in this new understanding of the Force. The galaxy had been torn apart by the Sith and the Empire, and now it stood at the threshold of another potential conflict, this time over how to use the very knowledge that had once been kept hidden from the galaxy. Luke's internal struggle would become as critical as the larger political conflicts that raged around him. He would come to realize that the galaxy could not continue on its path of constant war and strife, but could only find peace through unity, an understanding of the Force that embraced its full spectrum. However, this path to unity would come at great cost. Plagueis' secret had the potential to reshape reality, and the temptation to use this power for personal or political gain would be too great for many. In this age of unprecedented power, the galaxy would face its greatest test, yet could it resist the urge to control time, shape destiny, and instead embrace balance, allowing the Force to guide them? Or would the galaxy fall once again into cycles of tyranny and division, as each faction sought to wield the secret for their own purposes? This existential question would come to define the final moments of the conflict between the emerging powers of the galaxy. It would be a confrontation not just between Jedi, Sith, and Force Walkers, but between the very nature of the galaxy's existence. Would the galaxy accept the wisdom of balance, or would it succumb to the temptation of control? The greatest battle would not be fought with armies or fleets, but within the hearts and minds of those who sought to hold the ultimate knowledge of the Force and shape the future. The eventual outcome of this conflict would determine the fate of the galaxy, whether it would fall into another cycle of war, chaos, and destruction, or whether it could finally move toward a lasting peace, where the Force was understood not as something to be controlled, but as something to be embraced in its entirety. As the different factions, Jedi, Sith, Force Walkers, and the common people, sought to harness or suppress the knowledge of Plagueis' final secret, the galaxy would be forced to confront the very essence of existence itself. The manipulation of time and destiny, once thought to be myth and legend, was now a reality. The potential consequences of such power were not limited to personal or political gain. They could unravel the very fabric of reality. The galaxy had never faced such a fundamental challenge, and the stakes of this conflict were higher than ever before. The Force Walkers, the central movement that had emerged as the bridge between Jedi and Sith, would find themselves at the forefront of this struggle, guiding the galaxy toward balance. They would serve as the mediators between the opposing factions, ensuring that neither the Jedi's dedication to purity nor the Sith's lust for domination would define the future. However, the path forward would not be without its challenges. The Force Walkers would find that peace could not be achieved simply through understanding the Force. It would require a fundamental reconstruction of the galaxy's power structures from the ground up. The New Republic, already fragile from years of conflict, would be the most directly affected by these changes. While the Republic had initially been founded to bring democracy and freedom back to the galaxy after the fall of the Empire, it was still deeply rooted in the old power structures that had allowed such darkness to take hold in the first place. The revelation of Plagueis' secret would force the Republic's leaders to reevaluate their political systems. Should they embrace the knowledge of the Force Walkers and work to create a unified vision for the galaxy, or would they allow the powerful remnants of the Sith and Jedi to dominate once more? The question would not just be about governance, but about identity itself. What would the galaxy stand for now when the old categories of light and dark no longer fit? The challenge would be even greater when new threats began to emerge from the shadows. The Sith remnants, led by Darth Maul or another ambitious Sith Lord, would see the knowledge of Plagueis' secret as the ultimate weapon. Having failed in the past to dominate the galaxy through brute force and terror, these Sith would now possess the means to reshape history and alter the galaxy's fate. They would seek to control time, rewriting the past and dictating the future, ensuring that the Sith would never fall again. Maul, driven by a fierce desire for revenge and an unquenchable thirst for power, would lead this new iteration of the Sith, one focused on strategic manipulation and subtle control rather than overt domination. Maul's ambitions would not be limited to simply taking over the galaxy. With the power to alter time itself, the Sith remnants could begin to reconstruct history, erasing the rise of the Jedi or preventing the downfall of the Sith. Their vision would be of a galaxy remade in their image, a place where the dark side held ultimate sway, and where the Jedi's idealistic notions of balance and harmony were forever banished. Maul's followers would rally to this new cause, seeing him not only as a leader, but as the architect of a new future where the Sith would rule through manipulation, not force. This time manipulation would, however, prove to be an enormous danger to the galaxy itself. The ability to change the past and future could lead to a fractured reality where timelines collided, creating chaos and paradoxes that could unravel the very existence of the galaxy. Plagueis, in his own obsession with life and death, had only begun to scratch the surface of this potential power. It was clear that no one, not even Maul or the Force Walkers, could truly comprehend the full extent of this knowledge without risking total destruction. The real question for the galaxy would become whether the power of Plagueis' secret could be used responsibly. Luke Skywalker, who had been instrumental in guiding the galaxy toward peace after the fall of the Empire, would now face his greatest test. He had always believed that balance in the Force required rejecting the extremes, the Jedi's cold detachment and the Sith's obsession with power. However, the final secret was no longer just about balance within the Force. It was about understanding that the nature of existence itself was in flux, and that any attempt to control or manipulate time could fundamentally destroy the very fabric of the universe. Luke's challenge would be profound. Could the Jedi truly adapt to this new understanding of the Force, or would their ancient doctrines, rooted in suppression and purity, prove to be their downfall? Would they be able to accept the darker aspects of the Force without falling victim to them? The weight of Plagueis' legacy would fall on Luke's shoulders as he sought to lead the Jedi into an entirely new age, one in which responsibility and humility became the core tenets of their teachings. At the same time, the Sith remnants, led by Maul or another Sith Lord, would continue their attempts to seize power, and the galaxy would once again be at the mercy of those who sought to dominate through manipulation, control, and fear. They would stop at nothing to prevent the rise of the Force Walkers, viewing them as interlopers in their quest to shape the galaxy in their image. The Sith's use of Plagueis' secret would be marked by a destructive force, one that would threaten not only the Republic but the very stability of time itself. The Force Walkers, now the most prominent faction, would continue to fight for their vision of a balanced galaxy. A vision that did not seek to control time or reshape reality, but to understand it. Their goal would be to prevent the misuse of Plagueis' secret and to ensure that the knowledge of time manipulation was never used to impose control over the galaxy's destiny. Their role as mediators would be more crucial than ever as they worked to prevent the forces of darkness from rewriting history and bringing about a new age of galactic tyranny. In the end, the galaxy would face its greatest existential crisis. The knowledge of Plagueis' secret, the power to control time and shape destiny, would force every faction, every individual, and every political entity to confront their own moral compass. The galaxy could either embrace this knowledge, using it to create a new age of balance and peace, or succumb to the temptation of power, plunging the galaxy into further chaos and destruction. Time itself would be at stake, and the choices made by those who held this knowledge would determine whether the galaxy could evolve or whether it would once again be doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. As the knowledge of Plagueis' final secret spread, the galaxy would be thrust into an era of unprecedented political complexity. The concept of manipulating time and destiny itself would fundamentally challenge the existing political order, as well as the philosophical foundations of both the Jedi Order and the Sith remnants. At the heart of this transformation would be the question of who should have control over such immense power. Darth Maul, the once betrayed Sith Lord, would seek to consolidate his position by uniting the Sith remnants under the banner of a new Sith empire, but with a more calculated approach than his predecessors. Maul's vision would no longer be centered on the old ways of Sith conflict. Instead, his ambitions would shift to the manipulation of time, seeing it as the key to eternal Sith rule and the creation of a galaxy where the Sith were never overthrown. The Sith remnants would begin their search for Plagueis' knowledge, hoping to unlock the full potential of manipulating events, timelines, and fates. If successful, Maul and his followers would seek to rewrite history, erasing the mistakes of the past, ensuring that their victory would be inevitable. The Force Walkers, now fully established as a philosophical movement, would become the galaxy's voice of reason. They would work tirelessly to prevent the Sith from using Plagueis' secret for domination. But the Force Walkers, though united in their understanding of balance, would face their own ideological battles. The Jedi, though reformed under Luke Skywalker, would find themselves torn. On one hand, they would align with the Force Walkers in recognizing the need for balance, but on the other, many Jedi still held firm to their traditional doctrines of light and dark, rejecting the deeper, more profound insights offered by the Force Walkers. Luke himself would struggle with this division, as his personal beliefs would clash with the Jedi Order's dogma, which had been rooted in centuries of tradition. He would see the value of embracing the full spectrum of the Force, but would also worry about the consequences of taking such a radical step. Could he truly guide the Jedi into a new era of enlightenment, or would he fail to balance the immense power of the Force, risking destruction once more? The New Republic, already in a fragile state after the fall of the Empire, would also feel the weight of this new reality. Leia Organa, A stalwart leader of the Republic would find herself torn between protecting the institutional stability of the galaxy and embracing the knowledge that could offer a true path to peace. She would know that such knowledge could empower the people, preventing future galactic wars, but it would also make the Republic vulnerable to the same forces of manipulation that had brought about the fall of the Empire. For Leia, the question was clear. Could democracy survive in a galaxy where the manipulation of time could change the course of history? Would the Republic succumb to authoritarianism driven by those who would exploit the secret knowledge for personal gain? However, the greatest danger lay in the threat of misuse. If either the Sith or a rogue faction within the galaxy managed to unlock the full potential of Plagueis' secret, they could not only alter the past, but also control the future. The ability to rewrite history, to undo past mistakes or prevent potential threats, could lead to an era where no individual or group could ever truly control their destiny again. What would happen if the Sith remnants, with their thirst for power, could erase entire periods of time where their enemies were victorious? What would it mean for the galaxy if leaders could use this knowledge to create timelines where their rule never ended, or erase the existence of anyone who stood in their way? The Force Walkers would become the galaxy's last line of defense, working behind the scenes to ensure that such power was never abused. They would not seek to control the galaxy, but rather mediate between the competing factions, helping to guide them towards balance. Theirs would be a difficult task, for they would need to protect the galaxy from the very knowledge they sought to safeguard. Luke Skywalker, despite his reluctance to wield Plagueis' knowledge, would come to understand that the future of the Force lay in the wisdom of balance, not the rejection of either side. He would need to teach the galaxy that the danger of Plagueis' secret was not just in its power, but in its potential for corruption. The galaxy would need to evolve, beyond the Jedi and Sith, into something new where the knowledge of Plagueis was understood as a tool, not a weapon of ultimate power. The Republic, under Leia's leadership, would eventually reach a crossroads. Would they allow the Force Walkers to help them evolve into a more balanced form of governance, or would they attempt to suppress the knowledge of time manipulation out of fear? If the Republic were to survive, it would require unity and understanding, the same principles that the Force Walkers championed. The real danger, however, would be from within. Those who sought to control time for personal gain, whether through the Sith remnants or ambitious leaders within the Republic, would see the knowledge of Plagueis as a means to secure absolute power. As the galaxy faced this crucial crossroads, the key question would be whether it could resist the temptation to use such immense power and instead choose a path that ensured freedom, peace, and balance. In the ultimate galactic showdown, the choices made by the Force Walkers, the Jedi, the Sith remnants, and the New Republic would decide the galaxy's fate. The final confrontation would not necessarily be a battle fought with weapons but with ideas, the power to control or protect the fabric of time, to rewrite history or preserve it, and to understand the Force in its entirety rather than in narrow extremes. It would be a battle for the soul of the galaxy, whether it would be guided by the wisdom of balance, or whether it would fall again to the lust for power that had consumed the Jedi and Sith for millennia. The ultimate legacy of Plagueis' secret would be in the choices made by the next generation of leaders, those who would either embrace its power for good or exploit it for their own ambition. Could the galaxy finally embrace the balance that Plagueis had once sought, or would it fall into chaos, unable to escape the inevitable destruction that came with the misuse of power? The answers to these questions would determine whether the galaxy could finally enter a new era of peace, or whether it would continue to be caught in the endless cycle of conflict and power struggles. As the galaxy evolved, the knowledge of Darth Plagueis' final secret would continue to shape the development of new Force-sensitive philosophies and ideologies. The Force Walkers, though initially a movement of balance and understanding, would find themselves challenged by new factions that arose, seeking to interpret the secret in their own ways. The galaxy, having endured centuries of division between Jedi and Sith, would now face a period of introspection and reconstruction. One of the most significant impacts of this newfound knowledge would be the emergence of new Force-sensitive movements. Unlike the Jedi, who had traditionally adhered to a strict moral code of detachment and service, or the Sith, who sought power through the dark side, these new movements would be based on the integration of light and dark as complementary forces. These philosophies would argue that true mastery of the Force came not through repression or control, but through understanding and harmony between all its aspects. The Force Walkers, who had initially bridged the gap between Jedi and Sith ideologies, would evolve into a spiritual guiding force, mentoring the next generations of Force-sensitive individuals. Their teachings would emphasize the importance of understanding one's emotions, attachments, and desires, not as weaknesses but as integral parts of the human experience that could be channeled positively through the Force. As the new leaders of the galaxy's spiritual movements, the Force Walkers would guide both new Jedi and Sith alike, showing them how to balance the contradictions within themselves and the galaxy. However, this understanding would not come easily. There would be those who would view the Force Walkers' acceptance of balance as dangerous. Traditional Jedi, who had long suppressed their emotions to prevent falling to the dark side, would find it difficult to accept that the dark side's power could be wielded for good. For them, the path of pure light seemed to offer the only guarantee of peace. Jedi factions that adhered to the old teachings would begin to fracture, creating a division within the Jedi Order itself. Some would embrace the teachings of the Force Walkers, while others would resist, believing that the dark side's corrupting influence could never be controlled. On the opposite side, the Sith remnants, under leaders like Darth Maul, would also face their own ideological battle. Maul, in particular, would be torn between the vision of Plagueis' ultimate secret, a galaxy reshaped by time manipulation and controlled destiny, and his more traditional Sith belief in gaining power through strength and conflict. The deeper understanding of Plagueis' secret would make Maul realize that the Sith's old ways, based on passion and conflict, might ultimately prevent the unification of the galaxy. In his pursuit of this newfound knowledge, he would begin to question whether the Sith should continue their cycle of conflict, or whether they could transcend their nature, using Plagueis' knowledge to reshape the galaxy through subtle, time-based manipulation rather than domination through war. This philosophical evolution within both the Jedi and Sith would lead to the creation of new conflict dynamics. The rise of the Force Walkers and the potential for time manipulation would create a new galactic Cold War. Factions that embraced the new ways of thinking would seek to maintain peace through understanding and balance, while others would seek to wield Plagueis' knowledge for power, rewriting history to secure their own dominance. The galaxy would no longer be divided by simple light versus dark, good versus evil. It would be defined by complex ideologies and the responsibility of controlling profound knowledge. Meanwhile, the Republic would be struggling to maintain its hold on power. The rise of new ideologies, coupled with the emerging factions that sought to control Plagueis' secret, would force the new Republic to rethink its approach to governance. In the past, the Jedi had acted as peacekeepers for the Republic, but with the rise of the Force Walkers, the role of the Jedi would be called into question. Could the Jedi continue to serve as the moral compass of the galaxy, or would they evolve into something more complex, working alongside the Force Walkers? Would the Republic need a new way of governing to accommodate the changing nature of the galaxy, or would it fall into chaos as various factions fought for control over the new time-altering knowledge? As the galaxy entered this new era, new generations of Force-sensitive beings would be born, ones who were not confined by the limitations of the past. These individuals would have access to Plagueis' secret in its entirety, allowing them to make decisions not only based on the present, but also influenced by an understanding of the future. These young Force users would not only challenge the old orders, but would have to learn to wield this immense power responsibly, knowing that their choices could alter the fate of the galaxy. In this uncertain future, the galaxy would face new dilemmas and moral questions. Would the knowledge of time manipulation lead to ultimate peace and understanding, or would it be used to manipulate the galaxy's past, erasing enemies or rewriting history? Could the galaxy evolve beyond the ancient divisions between Jedi and Sith, or would these two factions continue to clash, now over the control of Plagueis' secret knowledge, rather than control of the Force itself? The final test for the galaxy would be whether those in power could resist the temptation to manipulate the Force for personal gain. The galaxy's future would not be determined by war, but by the wisdom of those who understood Plagueis' ultimate legacy. If the Force Walkers, the Jedi, and the Sith remnants could come together and embrace the balance Plagueis had uncovered, the galaxy might finally find peace. But if they failed to control this new knowledge, the danger of chaos would remain. The galaxy's future would rest on the next generation, not just the legacy of the Jedi or the Sith, but the force of unity and balance that the Force Walkers represented. Only by embracing the full spectrum of the Force, both its light and its dark sides, could the galaxy move forward. The ultimate resolution would come when the next leaders of the galaxy finally understood the full implications of Plagueis' secret, and used it not to rewrite history, but to guide the future toward an era of lasting peace. In conclusion, Darth Plagueis' final secret would be the most powerful and transformative discovery the galaxy had ever known. The potential to manipulate time, life, and death would alter the very fabric of existence, offering unparalleled power to those who could understand and wield it. The galaxy, long shaped by the binary conflict between Jedi and Sith, would find itself facing a new and unprecedented challenge: how to responsibly wield this power without falling into the same cycles of conflict, manipulation, and tyranny that had defined the past. As the knowledge spread, the galaxy would see the rise of new philosophies and movements, such as the Force Walkers, who sought to unite the wisdom of both light and dark, guiding the galaxy towards a future of balance and understanding. The old factions, the Jedi and Sith, would struggle to adapt, torn between tradition and the need for evolution. The Sith remnants, now armed with Plagueis' secret, would seek to control time and destiny to reshape the galaxy in their image, but their ambition would come at a great cost, threatening the fabric of reality itself. The New Republic, weakened by political infighting and external threats, would be forced to confront the existential implications of Plagueis' secret. Should they embrace the knowledge and trust in the wisdom of the Force Walkers, or would they fall into chaos, struggling to control what they could not understand? The galaxy's future would hinge on whether these leaders could resist the temptation to manipulate time for personal gain, or whether they could rise above their own ambitions to guide the galaxy toward a future of peace. Ultimately, the key question would be whether the galaxy could evolve into a new era, one where unity, wisdom, and balance shape the galaxy's future instead of control and manipulation. Those who understood the full scope of Plagueis' secret, the Jedi, Sith, Force walkers, and ordinary beings, would hold the fate of the galaxy in their hands. Could they use the knowledge responsibly and guide the galaxy towards peace? Or would the temptation of power once again lead to division and destruction? The resolution of these questions would determine whether the galaxy could finally transcend its cycles of conflict, forging a future of lasting balance, or whether it would fall into the same chaos that had plagued it for centuries. The legacy of Darth Plagueis and his final secret would resonate through the ages, shaping the galaxy's future for generations to come. The Force, as always, would remain both a tool and a reflection of the galaxy's destiny, one that could either be shaped by wisdom or undone by ambition.